Two young women safely arrive at their destination. However, their lives take a sudden and drastic turn shortly afterward. This marks the beginning of an unending and intense adventure, where they must fight the greatest battle of their lives, a battle that will test their intelligence, courage, and strength to the fullest extent. The story begins with two beautiful girls who are preparing to travel to a farm in New York for further education. They are brimming with joy and excitement as they talk to each other about their plans. One of them exclaims, "This will also give us a chance to visit Europe and do lots of shopping." The following morning, their uncle Jason, who is an FBI agent, arrives to pick them up. When they reach Jason's house, they are greeted by Jason's girlfriend, who warmly welcomes them and expresses her happiness at meeting them. Later, as they head to the city, Katie and Nancy make an interesting decision. They decide to change their names. Katie chooses the name, Hater, while Nancy opts for, Ripley. The next day, Jason takes both of them to a bus stop because they need to travel to an agricultural farm for their studies. While waiting for the bus, Jason suggests they use a code word to inform him of their safe arrival. Katie proposes using the word apple, but Jason advises them to use a different word each time so that no one can decipher their code words. While they are waiting, two young men pass by and notice Katie and Nancy. Intrigued by their presence, the boys show interest in them. Shortly after, Jason leaves to attend to his responsibilities, trusting that the girls will manage the rest of the journey on their own. Katie and Nancy, meanwhile, decide to grab a coffee at a nearby restaurant. Coincidentally, the two boys, named Jade and Lucas, also come to the same restaurant and strike up a conversation with them. Katie and Nancy introduce themselves by their new names, Hater and Ripley. During their chat, Katie mentions that they are heading to an agricultural farm in New York for their studies. Jade responds enthusiastically, saying that they are also traveling to the same place and offers to take them along. Katie politely declines their offer, but as the boys prepare to leave, Nancy persuades Katie to reconsider. Eventually, they decide to travel with Jade and Lucas. However, instead of reaching the farm, they arrive at a house near a dense forest. Katie and Nancy become uneasy and demand to be taken to the farm immediately. At that moment, Jade and Lucas's mother appears and greets them with warmth. She kindly invites them to have tea and assures them that the boys will drop them off at their destination later. While they are sipping tea, Katie receives a message from her uncle Jason. She quickly replies with the code word, apple, which reassures Jason that they have arrived safely. Later, Lucas's mother prepares food for them. Unbeknownst to Katie and Nancy, the food contains a sedative. As soon as they eat, they begin to feel disoriented and realize something is amiss. Attempting to escape, they run as far as they can but eventually collapse and lose consciousness. The next morning, they wake up to find themselves in a desolate forest, their hands bound tightly with iron chains. Overcome with fear, they scream for help. Moments later, Jade appears and reveals that they are in a place where no one will come to rescue them. He said there was no point in their screaming or shouting. A short while later, a man named Boris arrived. Holding Katie's phone in his hand, he revealed that someone named Jason had sent a message to her. The message included Katie's response, where she had written the word, apple. Boris demanded to know the meaning of the code word. Katie explained that it was a secret term used to indicate their safety. After understanding its purpose, Boris deceitfully replied to Jason, writing, "Everything is fine," along with the code word, apple, to throw him off track. Following this, Boris and his accomplices forced Katie and Nancy to take a bath against their will. While this was happening, a police officer named Sheriff arrived at the scene. Katie and Nancy, upon seeing him, immediately pleaded for help. However, they soon realized that the officer was also complicit in the crimes alongside Jade and Lucas. This shocking discovery terrified them even more. Katie and Nancy repeatedly begged for their release, promising not to disclose anything about the events. They even offered a large sum of money in exchange for their freedom. Despite their desperate pleas, their words were ignored. Shortly afterward, the officer shamelessly consumed a Viagra pill and targeted Katie for his vile intentions. After some time, the officer was seen emerging from Katie's container, making it evident that he had assaulted her. Meanwhile, Jason became increasingly anxious because Katie had reused the code word, apple, which was highly unusual. At the same time, the perpetrators sent a psychologically unstable and drug-addicted man into Nancy's container. The man, upon entering, pressed a lit cigarette against Nancy's stomach, causing her to scream in agony. He then assaulted her, crossing all limits of inhumanity. Jason, on the other hand, called the New York agricultural farm to inquire about Katie and Nancy. He was informed that the two girls had never arrived there. This confirmation convinced Jason that they were in grave danger. Without wasting any time, he set out to find them. Back at the scene, Katie and Nancy's situation worsened. Jade and Lucas masked their faces before presenting them to the next customer. The customer himself arrived wearing a pig-faced mask. Jade and Lucas unveiled the girls' faces for him to inspect. Nancy, upon seeing this man, was overcome with terror and began screaming uncontrollably. The man chose Nancy and took her into the container, where he assaulted her. When he left, Katie rushed to Nancy and found her in a terrible condition. Meanwhile, Jason reached the police station to report Katie and Nancy's abduction. There, he met the same police officer who had earlier assaulted Katie. Jason informed the officer that he was an FBI agent and described the situation. The officer inquired how Jason knew they had been abducted. Jason explained that he had instructed Katie to use the code word only once, but her reuse of the word indicated she was in danger. The officer secretly passed this information to Boris and also informed him that Katie's uncle was an FBI agent. Upon hearing this, Boris advised Jade to eliminate the girls immediately to avoid any complications. He also suggested focusing on capturing other girls from the city according to their plans. Katie, who was secretly listening to their conversation near the container, relayed everything to Nancy. Later, Boris entered Katie's container and assaulted her as well. Meanwhile, Jason reached the restaurant where Katie and Nancy had encountered Jade and Lucas. He questioned one of the employees, who provided details about Boris's car. The following day, Katie told Nancy that the criminals were planning to kill them soon. At that moment, Jade and Boris returned with the same psychotic man who had previously assaulted Nancy. They took him along, leaving the girls under surveillance to prevent their escape. As soon as they left, Katie distracted the guard assigned to watch them by pretending to be interested in him. When he came closer, she attacked him by biting his neck, causing severe bleeding that led to his instant death. Katie and Nancy then freed themselves from their chains and hid. When the corrupt police officer arrived at the scene, the girls stealthily stole his vehicle and fled. They drove to a mall, where they bought various items, including hammers, axes, tennis balls, several bananas, and dangerous weapons. At the cashier's counter, they managed to extract Boris's home address. At the same time, Jason, with the help of an insurance company, located Boris's address by tracking his car. Boris was enjoying music at his home when suddenly Katie and Nancy arrived. They struck him in the face with tennis balls laced with nails, which rendered him unconscious. When Boris regained consciousness, he found himself tied to a table. Boris offered them a substantial amount of money in exchange for his freedom, but Katie and Nancy were only interested in seeking revenge. Meanwhile, Jason had arrived outside Boris's house. When he entered, he discovered that Boris was already dead. Jason rushed outside, but by that time, Katie and Nancy had already fled in a vehicle. Jason learned that Katie's phone was with the corrupt police officer. Before Jason could react, the officer appeared behind him, pointing a gun at him. On the other hand, Katie and Nancy arrived at a church where they discovered the whereabouts of the man with the pig mask. Katie attacked him with a stick, knocking him unconscious. They tied the man to the back of their car and dragged him all the way to the town. There, they purchased matches and gasoline from a shop. They poured gasoline over the man and burned him alive, ending his life in a horrific manner. Meanwhile, Jason managed to subdue the corrupt police officer by tying him to a chair. Shortly afterward, the officer abducted two new girls and brought them to the same place. When he tried to assault the girls, Katie and Nancy arrived silently and struck him on the head with a stick, rendering him unconscious. When the officer woke up, he found himself tied to a chair. Begging for mercy, he pleaded with Katie and Nancy to spare his life. Kay, however, pointed a gun at him and threatened to shoot. She fired multiple shots one after another, but each time, the officer miraculously survived, causing him to smirk. However, in the very next moment, Katie shot him directly, killing him instantly. Katie and Nancy then freed the two captive girls and instructed them to untie Jason's ropes. They themselves left the scene immediately. Once the girls untied Jason, they revealed that Katie and Nancy had directed them to do so. Jason instantly realized that the two women were none other than Katie and Nancy. The scene then shifted to Jade and Lucas's mother, who was drinking alcohol. Suddenly, she felt dizzy and collapsed unconscious. When she regained consciousness, she found herself tied to a chair in the basement. Directly in front of her, Jade was also tied up. Katie and Nancy appeared and began beating Jade in front of his mother with a stick. They struck him so severely that he eventually succumbed to the beating, leaving his mother crying uncontrollably. Afterward, they took Jade's mother to Lucas. Katie handed Lucas a stick and ordered him to kill his mother, threatening to shoot him if he refused. However, Lucas declined to harm his mother, leading Nancy to shoot him dead. They then cleaned the gun and placed it in Lucas's hand, ensuring that the police would believe it was a murder-suicide between mother and son. Jade and Lucas's mother offered Katie and Nancy a large sum of money in exchange for sparing her life. Her proposal made them laugh. Katie then used a cutting machine to ruthlessly decapitate her. A few days later, Uncle Jason arrived at Katie and Nancy's house. He took them with him as they left for New York together. With this, the film ended. Friends, if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. See you in the next video.